Thailand's Prime Minister Prayut chan-ocha has warned that the entire country could be consumed by flames if pro-democracy protests continue to take place. Since July, protesters have been on the streets demanding changes to the constitution and free and fair elections. This despite legal action and arrests from the government.
Heading for detention unbowed, Thai student activists holding up the three-fingered salute that symbolizes their core demands: stop harassment, rewrite the constitution, and free and fair elections. Emerging later from court, they spoke to reporters. It's been 5 or 6 hours that we lost our freedom. Even though we are being released on bail, we all know that we will not be far from jail. We will be in the jail that obstructs our freedom, oppresses people who come out calling for democracy and our future. The government is not giving ground either. Thailand's Prime Minister issued a warning that growing polarization could destroy the country. If each side insists on defeating the other politically, our country will collapse. If that happens, just wait and see. Everyone will live on a fiery land consumed by flames. If that happens, I'm at a loss for what to do. Prayut chan-ocha is a former army chief who led a coup in 2014. Last year, he was elected prime minister in an election critics said was rigged. Activists also want to reform Thailand's revered monarchy. That would include overhauling a draconian royal defamation law which protects King Maha Vajiralongkorn. Anyone insulting the monarch can receive up to 15 years in prison. The protest movement organizes largely online, and the government is cracking down there too. It's blocked Facebook groups discussing the monarchy and vows to expand its dragnet. If they start a new group, do anything illegal violates the Computer Crime Act, we'll need to act again. This is the system that we adhere to under the same standard for everyone. We don't just stop halfway. We'll keep doing this no matter how many times it takes. Activists vow they'll hold a major protest next month if their demands are not met.
So what exactly are the options before the government? For more, I'm joined by Thailand's Education Minister, Nataphol Teepsuwan. Mr. Teepsuwan, good to have you on the program. Protesters want the government that you are a part of to resign so that new elections can be held. Will the government resign?
At the moment, I think the economic problem is our major concern. If there is a resignation, there's going to be a long, drawn process that would not move the country forward. I think the countries are looking at the ways to move forward amid the COVID pandemic. So I think it's a better situation if we're able to maintain what we have done during COVID and continue what we're trying to improve in terms of economic situation.
But then you've been having near daily protests since July in Thailand. Are those protests not something that the government needs to address?
I think once you recognize the intention of the protest and have the dialogues with the protesters, which I have last Wednesday, most of the concern on my behalf at the Ministry of Education is about education reform. The protests are talking about the new way of educating students, and they want Thailand to improve in our education system. So I think it's a positive sign that we have the dialogue with them, so we understand their needs.
But are you really having a dialogue? Of course, the protests that you are referring to were protests by high school students. It must be made clear that these protests were within the wider context of the pro-democracy protests, which themselves are student-led. You keep saying that you want to have dialogue, but then the government has charged something like 13 people for sedition and for being connected to the protests. So I'm just wondering what the message here is for the protesters. On the one hand, the government arrests them, and on the other, you are saying that we want to have dialogue.
Okay, I don't want to comment on individual cases because each individual, act with or without respect to the law. That's the authority have to take into consideration, and I think they have, act according to each situation differently. But for me, as Ministry of Education, I've been aware that number of students are showing sign, creating gestures that showing their displeasure, and I want to know whether all these displeasure are about education or politics, and I found out that most of them are about educational reform.
But those educational reforms, again, Minister, are within the wider context of the pro-democracy protests. And let me just quote what you said around 8 days back. You said that the right to protest is part of the democratic process and the government is willing and ready to listen to all its citizens. It would appear you certainly want to talk to the protesters, but the government doesn't, because your Prime Minister, Prayut chan-ocha, is warning that the country will be consumed by flames if these protests carry on. So why isn't the government listening to you?
Okay, I think majority of the protesters are students and university students, and the Prime Minister have given directive to me as Education Minister and another minister who's in charge of higher education to listen to our concerns that are mainly from students, both university and high school. And I think we have taking that approach, and we are combining all their concerns. And I have to admit, on my end, at the Ministry of Education, majority are about education, not politics.
So if you've taken their concerns on board, why are student-led protesters threatening another massive protest in September if their demands are not met?
Yeah, I think we have to understand that most of the demands cannot be solved within a week or a month. So I think we have to relay our messages that all their concerns will be taken into consideration, but whether we can do or we can't do, we'll highlight them to the students in terms of priority. What are the most urgent issues? Which are the things that we have taken action already? Because most of the things that they have talked about, I have addressed in my plan to reform education on Monday, 10 days ago.
Right. Right. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you so much for joining us. Nataphol Teepsuwan, Thailand's Education Minister.
Okay, appreciate the time. Thank you.